Okay, hello and good evening. Today I am speaking to a fellow South African expat, but she's in another continent. She's in Israel, and this is my first guest from Israel, Rulin Marks. She's done many things, a businesswoman of all sorts. Recently wrote an article for a publication, Lay of the Land, on Iran, and we're going to have a little bit of a chat of the Middle East, Israel, Palestine, broad topics. So, Rulin, welcome.
Thank you. I am thrilled to be here.
So you are in Israel. Tell me, what is Israel like? Like, I guess you guys just had an election. What is happening in the country? Like, anything interesting about it?
Well, first of all, Israel is nothing like what you read in the newspapers. Very often people, and we encourage people to visit the country because you'll see for yourself, the country is very diverse. It is very vibrant. The geopolitical situation that the media tends to simplify. Once you get here, you see just how complex it really is. And when we talk about threats, just how very, very real those threats are. And as you just mentioned, last week we had an election, very controversial results. It wasn't a huge surprise that Benjamin Netanyahu came in again and that he is likely to be the next prime minister if he can put together a coalition. Because here in Israel, it's not necessarily who wins the election, it's if they can put together a working government. But also major shock and concern because a party relatively small in the last elections, barely showing in the last elections, managed to double their presence and become the third largest party in the Knesset. And the concern is their ideologies. They are extremely right-leaning. And there are concerns with many people in Israel what this means for our civil liberties moving forward, what this means for our standing in the world. However, we do know that Benjamin Netanyahu, whether you like him, whether you don't like him, is a very, very smart man. He's the consummate politician. He knows the challenges that Israel faces domestically and internationally. And we hope he is able to maneuver around these threats.
So when you say far right in Israel, that usually does not, add up. Generally my impression of somebody being far right is, I suppose, lack of a better word, neo-Nazi. That's usually what the media portrays as. And I mean, obviously that is not an ideology that's going to, win any election votes in Israel. So maybe can you just define, what do you mean by, a more right-wing party got a bigger share of the vote?
Well, it's an excellent question, and we believe that this rise to prominence or to party or to power rather has been a result of last year's internal fighting. I don't know if you recall, last year May we had that 11-day war with our neighbors in Gaza, where we had an exchange of them firing thousands of rockets on Israeli civilians. And we had to defend ourselves not only with our iron domes, but also with a military operation. However, egged on by Hamas and the terror entities in the Gaza Strip, there were elements within Arab society here in Israel that attacked Jewish targets. And in response, Jewish extremists, and we can call them terrorists as well, attacked Arabs back. And fomenting that kind of division was what we call in Israel the far right. These are an extreme element within Israeli society. They are Jewish. They have some pretty extreme and offensive viewpoints. Some of them they've tried to push forward in the last couple of days, which we hope will be smacked down very, very quickly. One of them today came from the co-chair of the party, Bezalel Smotrich, saying that he rather demands a de facto annexation of the West Bank something that, for a variety of reasons, I can see by your facial expression,
Yeah,
is something that
it does not sound good, eh?
it doesn't sound good. It's things like that. It's wanting to walk back on certain minority rights. Yesterday, Smotrich also sent a letter to the Israeli Football Association saying that it's anti-democratic to play football or soccer on a Saturday. And Israel it's a Jewish state, but we're a secular state. We aren't a theocracy. And this kind of language and inflammatory language against minority communities, we see as offensive and far right.
Okay, well, that's interesting. It's interesting to me that and I guess this is part of the misrepresentation. There are people in Israel who are calling this out and saying, "Look, we don't want to live like that." I mean, you touched a little bit now on the West Bank and Gaza story, and whenever we learn about anything in the media about Israel, it's always Israel/Palestine. You never hear of the two like in isolation. So, I mean, can you maybe give us your understanding of what that conflict is about, and is it ever going to be solved?
Well, that is the million-shekel question. Will we ever solve the situation? So, it goes back in history. And the problem with the world that we live in today is that journalists, commentators don't like to look at the history. But in order to understand the conflict, it's extremely important. So I'll go back maybe 8 decades to when Israel was founded. And people are under the impression that Jews came in from Europe after the Second World War and displaced Palestinians. But that's not the situation at all. This is the ancient historical homeland of the Jewish people, an area we've always had a presence since biblical days, despite being exiled, despite various attempts by the Romans, by the Ottomans, by the Arabs to colonize the area. Now, when the Romans came in, they called this area Palestina. And over the years, and going back to recent history, this area was known as Palestine. It fell under the Turks, and then it fell under the mandate of the British. And there were Arabs and there were Jews. In 1947, when the United Nations voted to partition the land, they created Syria, they created Jordan, and they voted to partition the land into a Jewish state and an Arab state. Now, there weren't such things as Palestinians as we know Palestinians in the media today. There were Jews and there were Arabs. The Jewish leaders accepted, and the state of Israel was born. And the Arabs, with a combined army of 5 countries, declared war on the fledgling Jewish state, and the rest is history. We gained our independence, we gained some territory, and since that time, there has been a conflict between the Jews and the Arabs of the area. It's also very important to mention that during the Second World War, there was a Muslim leader known as Haj Amin al-Husseini who pushed Nazi doctrine, who was a supporter of Hitler. And it's also important to note, because it's a part of history that is often shoved to the side, that when the Arab countries declared war on the fledgling state of Israel, Arab leaders said, leave your homes, and once we've driven the Jews into the sea, come back and claim back your homes. So the result is a decades-long conflict between the Arabs, who in the 1960s adopted the term Palestinians, which is what we know today, decades after the State of Israel was founded, and Israel. And despite, and I'm not saying Israel's perfect and we haven't made mistakes, but despite numerous attempts of coming from Israel to sue for peace, it has been turned down every time. Various American leaders have tried. We've had the Oslo Accords. We've had, infinite attempts to bring a solution. But the reality is this: you've got a Jewish state, the state of Israel, in Gaza, which was territory gained and then lost by Egypt. You've got Hamas who rule. They have a charter which calls for the destruction of the state of Israel. And they're internationally recognized as a terror entity, including by the United Nations. And in the West Bank, you've got a much more complicated situation. Yeah. You've got 3 areas. One is controlled, and this is administratively by Israel. One is joint Israel and the Palestinians, and the one is controlled by the Palestinian Authority, who also don't recognize the state of Israel. So this is where we have conflict, and this is where we have this ongoing cycle of violence.
So you would say part of the solution would be at least to acknowledge Israel exists. I mean, it has been existing since, I guess, 1948. That should be like, I suppose, the first step, because, I mean, there is a peace agreement between Israel and Egypt, for example. There is one now, I think, between Saudi Arabia and Dubai. Was it last year or the year before? They made some kind of agreement. So at least there is some Arab countries that have come to terms with the fact, and by the way, Turkey is not Arab, but, Muslim country, who have come to the fact that, at least Israel exists. But I suppose there are others who don't accept that yet.
Well, they don't just accept the fact that Israel exists. They've seen the benefits of not only recognizing Israel, but working with Israel, having normalization agreements with Israel in the region. So at the moment, we've got peace, decades-long peace with Jordan and with Egypt. And we've got our Abraham Accords, or the normalization treaties, because we were never in a state of war, with Bahrain, with Morocco, with Sudan, and with United Arab Emirates. And There's hardly a day goes by without some or other agreement. Just today, we signed an agreement between Israel, Jordan, and the United Arab Emirates to provide solar panel energy to Israel in exchange for desalinated water. As somebody who I know who's interested in climate issues, this is huge. We've got other countries like Saudi Arabia that maybe not so covertly are talking to us anymore. Maybe it's more overt that they're talking to Israel. So they recognize the benefits of Israel in the region, just how powerful Israel is in the region. And there is a growing fatigue with the Palestinians that they've been asked to participate in summits. They've been invited by Israel and other powers, that they've been given tremendous amount of aid from countries like Kuwait, from countries like Oman, to countries like the United Arab Emirates, to build up their infrastructure, and that money has been squandered into promoting incitement and terrorism. When I say the Middle East is complex, there's so many different layers to this conflict. It didn't help the Palestinians that when we signed the Abraham Accords with the United Arab Emirates, that they burnt Emirati flags and effigies of their king, which is a massive, massive insult to the wonderful people of the United Arab Emirates. Whereas with Israel, they've been embraced, and trade and cooperation between the two countries is now in the billions of dollars.
Okay, well, I mean, that's sort of also part of what I don't get, what everyone thinks of the history. And I know history is disputed and it's contested, and there's always 10 facts you can pull from one corner and the other corner. But I would say that the reality is the Israeli state is there. You have to either accept it or you're going to fight it, So it's sort of kind of besides the point to me whether it has a right to exist or it doesn't exist. That just I don't understand that logic, to be honest. But I've also spoken to Palestinians. Some of them studied with me and stuff, and from the West Bank, not from Gaza. I have never met somebody from Gaza. And, some of them have said, that, right, their leadership is hopeless. I think they would even agree with you with that. But they have said, look, they don't like the fact that they have to go through checkpoints sometimes, and they don't like the fact that, that they feel a bit mistreated as well. So, like, what do you say to those people that would say, look, yeah, I hear you, Israel is there, we want maybe two states, or we want just a place for ourselves. We understand our leadership is useless, but simultaneously, we don't want to live like that.
Well, look, I can totally understand it. I think it's a very, very fair statement. We are two people that don't necessarily want to live together, so we need to find the most amicable divorce possible. And I have empathy. I have a great deal of empathy for the Palestinian people, because they do have leadership that doesn't have their best interest at heart. You've got Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority, who is in the 17th year of his 4-year term because he refuses to have elections. And it is believed that he could lose those elections to Hamas gaining more prominence in the West Bank. And there's frustration from Israel's side because all the aid that is given has gone towards what we call pay for slay, which is paying the salaries of terrorists, or gone towards funding incitement in schools, which just creates this ongoing economy of terror, where we have Palestinians coming into Israel or seeing Israelis committing terror attacks. We attack back. We clamp down with more restrictions. And with regards to checkpoints, I can understand that. Nobody wants to have the indignity of being checked and scrutinized. Why are you coming in? What are your intentions? However, we have had a situation, and we've had it this year, where we've had an uptick in terror attacks, where unfortunately the security situation has necessitated that we do have a security fence, where we do have checkpoints, because for Israelis, and I'm talking Israelis of all persuasions, Arab Israelis, Christian Israelis, Jewish Israelis, tourists, we want to ensure that they are as safe as possible. So I understand the frustration, and I have a great deal of empathy. But we have to look at the bigger picture. If you talk to any Israeli, we would love to go back to the days where we shopped in the Arab villages in the West Bank, and Palestinians came to work, and we interacted with each other, and we just got on with the business of getting on with life, because I think that's what we all want.
Okay, no, well, that's sort of fair comment. I mean, I guess everyone wants to work I'm not sure everyone, but most people, decent people, would like to work towards a common solution. Obviously, Israel also finds itself in a difficult geopolitical situation, because its neighbors have not always been kind to them. Syria, for example, and Iran, that I know quite well, have outright made threats to Israel, and that does not help. It also doesn't help the fact that Iran has been giving weapons to Hamas, and that sort of, creates more of the radical fanaticism, right?
Well, Iran is the world's biggest sponsor of terrorism, and we know that the money, the weapons that are going towards terror entities to their proxies. We've got Hezbollah on our northern border in Lebanon, and we've got Hamas and various other terror entities in the south in Gaza. I mean, when was it? Yesterday, I was quite surprised to hear that Hamas had actually arrested 2 people in Gaza, allegedly for firing rockets towards Israel, something you don't hear about. Now, I'm not saying that Hamas are going to sing Kumbaya and make peace with us anytime soon, but they do recognize, even if it's reluctantly so, that if you fire on us, you're going to invite a response. And earlier this year, when the Palestinian Islamic Jihad fired thousands of rockets on Israelis, Hamas were very, very quick to say, we've got nothing to do with that. And they realized that people in Gaza are also getting sick and tired of the ongoing situation, the humanitarian disaster, them being used as human shields by terror entities, and provoking the inevitable Israeli response.
But do you think then that, I mean, because, radicalization usually happens with the youth, the young men of a sort. They tend to be the first ones who have nonsense being drilled into their head. And you're basically, if I understand you correctly, saying that the Palestinian population themselves are getting fed up with this. I mean, because it's a minority among the Palestinians that are actually holding the situation hostage, right?
Yes, I've been able to speak to Palestinians over the years, and we've seen even in our media, on the very rare occasion that Palestinians in Gaza, for fear of their own personal safety, are speaking to the media, and they say, we've had enough. Money that is given for aid is taken by terror entities and used for more weapons. It's used to fuel their terrorism, is used for them to live in wonderful villas while we struggle, while we don't have electricity, while we don't have what we need coming in. Now, I will say current to previous Israeli administration have been using the carrot approach with Gaza, saying if we get calm for calm, we will open up more work permits. We will let in more and more aid. We will allow for more and more infrastructure. Prime Minister Lapid, years ago, when he was our foreign minister, before he was prime minister and foreign minister, put forward an economic plan saying, let's help you build your economy, and in exchange, let's have a peace. But you've got entities there that are hell-bent in keeping both people hostage, and it is financed and promoted by Iran.
Okay. So there's a lot of interest in not making it happen, and within Israel itself. I mean, what is the debate like? Because I imagine Israelis are divided on this issue as well. Like, what their response should be.
Well, one thing that united Israelis from the left to the center to the right is the imperative of security. You'll find, and I often talk to people about this when we approach elections, is that when it comes to platforms like security, every single party is on the same page, because we want to save lives, we want to prevent terror, we want to prevent war. The solution to the conflict, sadly, the support for a two-state is dwindling, because we haven't seen any kind of reputable partner coming from the other side that wants to negotiate with us. The reality is we can't have one state. We are two people, both deserving of our national aspirations. The Palestinians want a country of their own. We want our country of our own. The reality is we don't want to live together. If we do, Israel will be destroyed demographically, and we want to hold on to our identity as the only Jewish state in the world, a safe place for Jews, especially as we see the extraordinary and very, very, very worrying rise of anti-Semitism around the world. And Palestinians don't want to live with us. They want their own national identity, their own country, etc., etc. So we have to find a way to make this happen. Adding more of a complication is you've got internecine fighting between Hamas and Fatah. So if there is a Palestinian state, what would it look like? These are two major entities that can't agree on anything. Their areas or their territories is not contiguous. How do we make that happen? Is this situation maybe a three-state solution? What happened? What is the right solution?
Well, that has been one critique, I guess, against the two-state solution, has been that you've got Palestine split, basically, between Gaza and the West Bank. And the argument is that it will be impractical to link the two together. I mean, what do you sort of say to those people?
Well, there's various schools of thought. A lot of theories have been pushed forward. What do we do? Do we have a series of highways? Do we do land swaps that will allow for it to be contiguous? How do we make it happen? And various American administrations, various parties who have an interest in broking peace have put forward solutions, but they have not been accepted. So there are so many. That's why I always say to people, before you criticize Israel or before you support either side, come here and see the situation for yourself, and you'll see just how complicated it is. Yeah. For Israel, the biggest imperative is our security. Yeah. And what guarantees will we have on our security, especially at our thinnest point, where you've got a matter of 5 kilometers between the West Bank and the nearest coastal town. That is how close it is. That is how small Israel is. And of course, just how close is a potential Palestinian state to firing on our airport. So all these things are what Israel thinks of.
Okay, well, I just want to ask you this. Why does Israel get so much attention, though? Because it's not the only country in the world of conflicts. If you'd look at, say, Kashmir is all, it's the Muslim and the Hindus fighting over a territory. It's as militarized as Israel in a certain sense. We have Turkey occupying northern Cyprus, for example. I've never seen a news article about it. I had to read up on it, So why does the Israeli conflict get so much, media coverage and focus? I mean, I guess it's good in one sense, but on the other hand, you have to ask the question, what is going on over here?
We say, people say Jews are the chosen people, and Jews say, well, can you choose somebody else to have, all this focus of attention? That's a huge question. It's something that baffles us, because no matter where you look, whether it's the United Nations or whether it's the global media, the sole focus of attention is on this tiny piece of land at the expense of other conflicts around the world. If I was Eritrean or Ukrainian or a woman in Somalia or the Sudan, I'd be thinking, or Darfur, or a Uyghur Muslim in a concentration camp in China, I would be thinking, where is the attention on my rights? Where's the attention on the Yazidi people and the infinite conflicts around the world? But Israel commands such a massive amount of focus. I don't know if it's because we're the only Jewish state in the world. I don't know if it's because this is the center of the world in terms of religion, so people are emotionally invested. I don't know if it's because news channels want to push a particular agenda. I don't know. We can have a whole conversation on how Israel is actually covered when it comes to the conflict. But it really boggles the mind. We just have to look at the United Nations, whose disproportionate focus on Israel is beyond comprehension. They haven't called for one emergency session on the protests in Iran or one resolution, but they have spent the last couple of weeks, doling out their critiques, the commissions of inquiry hearings, their resolutions against the state of Israel. It actually boggles the mind.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question to me. I mean, I was looking at the amount of UN resolutions against Israel. It's an enormous amount compared to other countries, and it's just it doesn't add up, in that sense. It's one of those weird things to me, because yeah, sure, it's complicated. I get there's two sides of every story, and I get that. They say, I suppose if I was a Palestinian, I would support some resolutions. But on the other hand, it's not the only conflict in the world. There are other places. I mean, to give you a good example, Mozambique. There is now, I think, 500,000 children being displaced in Mozambique, in Cabo Delgado. The South African press next door doesn't cover it. You have to go and look for it.
Well, you talk about South Africa. South Africa has one foreign policy mandate for the year, and that is get Israel's observer status kicked off the African Union. Israel, like Greece, like China, has observer status at the African Union. And it basically means we can observe meetings and network with other leaders. It doesn't mean that we are in any position to put forward resolutions or to vote on resolutions. And this is their sole focus, not the situation in Ukraine and Russia, which they are moving towards supporting Russia, not the situation on their own doorstep with Mozambique, not getting much needed investment into the country at a time where there is increased load shedding, increased unemployment, the infrastructure is disintegrating at a rapid rate. The sole focus is on getting Israel kicked out of the African Union and how best they can play a role in demonizing Israel. You know, any hope that South Africa has ever had of being a broker for peace in the Middle East, it has shot out the window because of their extreme bias against the Jewish state, which is ironic because other African countries are coming to the conclusion that why should we have to choose sides? We should be able to talk to both Israelis and Palestinians, and working with Israel means that we get help for our country because the Israelis understand the challenges we face in Africa on so many levels. Why South Africa can't follow like the rest of the continent is...
Well, I want to read you what the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Naledi Pandor, said to, I think it was to Anthony Blinken when he was in South Africa about the Ukraine war. And, you know, she said, this is the position of South Africa. We support the search for peace. We are appalled by war. We abhor war because it brings untold suffering, which is something we experienced under apartheid. So this is the position we have. Okay, up until there, I agree with her. Then she said, with respect to the role of multinational bodies such as the United Nations should play, we believe that all principles that are humane to the United Nations Charter and international humanitarian law must be upheld for all countries, not just some. Just as much as the people of Ukraine deserve their territory and freedom, the people of Palestine deserve their territory and freedom. So we should equally be concerned that what is happening to the people of Palestine as we are with what is happening to the people of Ukraine. Now, you know, fine, I agree that I'm concerned about what's happening to the people in Palestine. I'm with that into some level, but it's not exactly the same as Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine, you know.
It's not the same. It's not the same, and it's a glaring double standard by Naledi Pandor, who can't apply the same position of wanting peace for both Israelis and Palestinians. You know, she has exhibited such a not just a bias, but and not just a double standard, but the actual demonization of the state of Israel. Russian tanks rolled into Ukraine completely unprovoked into Ukrainian sovereign territory. We are in a conflict here over disputed territory. You know, if we're talking about international law would recognize the territory as disputed territory because there has been no Palestinian state that Israel has annexed territory from. There's never been a Palestinian or a state of Palestine. So, you know, the area we're talking about is disputed, and Israel has not rolled out tanks in to annex any territory. We respond when we are provoked. As successive defense ministers have said, quiet will be met with quiet.
Okay, but do you think then, I mean, I understand that Israel is, I mean, they think security first, and it is a militarized society, you know, everyone serves in the army. But do you think that response of, you know, the military response to the terrorist problem, if you will, is always the correct response? I mean, aren't there other ways also to sometimes deal with it, or does it really depend on the situation?
Well, we have to go back to what is causing terrorism, and here we have to hold other countries accountable. If you're giving money to the Palestinians, you need to have the checks and balances in place to see where that money is going. If you are giving money to projects where you think are fostering cooperation or improving the infrastructure for Palestinians, you need to monitor that better. We have the situation with UNRWA, the United Nations Relief Works Agency, where we've seen countries actually cut their funding, including the United Arab Emirates, because the funding was going towards pushing incitement against Jews and Israel in school textbooks, pushing that narrative in the media, using UNRWA hospitals and schools as weapon storage facilities for terror entities. It also comes down to looking at various Palestinian NGOs. Are they doing what their mandate says they are doing, or are they being used as fronts for moving money around? There's an excellent book called Harpoon that you should read about how the money is funneled and how the money is actually traced. We have to hold the Palestinian Authority accountable. No more pay for slay. No more paying the salaries of terrorists or giving stipends to their families if that terrorist is neutralized carrying out a terror attack. And if you fire rockets and mortars onto Israeli sovereign territory, putting our civilians at risk, including myself, I mean, I'm sitting here. This is my study, which is also a bomb shelter. You know, this door is reinforced steel. My walls are reinforced concrete, as most houses here have, because this is the situation we live with. So before we look at a military solution, we have to look at the cause. What is fomenting this? What is causing this?
Well, I have this story to tell you about Israel and reinforced concrete. So we were designing a reservoir for natural gas for Israel. It's part of the company I work for. And it had to be designed against bombs, actually being dropped, because that's what Israel is. And it happened to be, if you just design for the bomb, it doesn't matter. It's strong enough to handle everything else. So it was just thick concrete and the easiest design we ever did. So that is a reality. Everything is thicker in that part of the world.
And above my head, you can't see is extractor. In case of chemical warfare, I have an extractor and filter. I mean, this is the situation that we have to be prepared for, because this is the situation that we live with in our region.
Okay, no, that's and then I guess the question is, under those military circumstances, why are people staying there? I mean, why wouldn't it be easier to go to a safer country then?
Because Israel's perfectly safe.
They manage
because
that.
It is a vibrant democracy, because there is Israelis love their lives. We're the 9th happiest people in the world, according to the United Nations Index on Happiness. Because life here
where's South African happiness? Do you know?
Not in the top 10. I can tell you that with confidence.
Yeah, I think that's part of the attitude against Israel. I think there's an inherent jealousy from countries whose leaders cannot deliver, cannot deliver what they promise to their population. And South Africa, I think, is a very good example of this, where it's easy to point fingers at other countries, for this or that, but they don't fix stuff themselves. And just, by the way, I have to be said, South Africa is selling weapons to the Saudis, who is committing major crimes against humanity, against the Yemenis at the moment. And I've never seen anyone have any UN resolution or even debate about South African military weapon going to the Saudi Arabia and Dubai at the moment.
No, there is nothing. The sole focus, it's almost a pathological focus on the state of Israel. But, coming back to why do people stay here? Because it's free, because it's tolerant, because it's diverse, because it's the homeland of the Jewish people, because it's a place that respects democracy and our minority communities, because it's a place of creativity and innovation, and where you can walk in the footsteps of the prophets, but also be in some of the most technologically advanced places of your life, and because it's a miracle. It's a miracle in the middle of the desert, where we have created this oasis, this thriving little oasis in the middle of the desert against unbelievable odds. And because we live life with absolute defiance, Israelis, you will find, don't sweat the small stuff. We don't have time to. We don't have time to quibble over small things when at any time a rocket can be fired from Gaza towards our citizens. And because as Jews, we've got nowhere else to go. We look around the world and we feel more and more unwelcome in various countries. Anti-Semitism is at exorbitant levels we haven't seen since before World War II. This is where we are safe. This is where we can define our future. This is where we can make decisions about our future. And this is where we can defend ourselves.
Okay, no, that's quite a strong statement. I want to pivot this conversation to your work, the Lay of the Land. It's subtitled "Reliable Reportage and Insightful Commentary on the Middle East by Seasoned Journalists from Regions and Beyond." What is this project about? Maybe tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it's a labor of love with myself and my two partners, Dave and Yair, and we wanted to bring the stories of Israel in the region that people don't get to see in the mainstream media. So we started the platform Lay of the Land at layoftheland.online. So if you want to check out our website, we're layoftheland.online. And thank you to you for writing such a brilliant and well-received article about the situation of women in Iran and the hijab and what that means for them. But we want to bring you the stories you don't hear. We want to bring you the stories of cooperation, because alongside all this talk of conflict, there is a whole country. Israel is a country beyond the conflict. And we want to bring you those stories. We want to talk about cooperation. We want to tell you what's going on in the region and the Jewish world. We are interested in those human interest stories. We are even interested in things that affect health and entertainment and sport, because that is what people are interested in. We also want to provide a platform for writers to have their work published and seen. And it's grown phenomenally. In fact, we are read everywhere in the world except for a tiny minority, a handful of countries. In fact, we read in countries that I didn't even know existed, or can't even contemplate how they found us, but they found us.
And North Korea, are they founded there yet?
They're real. I mean, there's not one called Narnia who I've checked out. Okay. And every Monday to Thursday, I bring you the news headlines from Israel, a little snippet of what's going on in the region, what's making the headlines here. But that's what we're about. We're really about creating a platform for talented writers like yourself to get your work out to as many people as possible.
Okay, well, that's very interesting over there. So, and how important is it to tell stories other than politics? Because I guess politics is there, it's important, but it's not. As you say, it's not everything that people live for, right?
It's extremely important, because people don't connect to politics. People connect to people, and people connect to their stories, and you understand each other better when you interact with other people and their stories. One of my favorite things on a Friday is to go on Twitter and to see the amount of Israelis, Emiratis, Bahrainis, Moroccans wishing each other Shabbat Shalom and Juma Mubarak. Why? Because we've taken the time to listen to each other's stories, find out about each other's cultures and experiences. And when it comes to something that we share together, a Sabbath on the same day, we can't wait to wish each other a good Sabbath. And that is how peace is formed. That is how peace is built. It's not agreements between governments that builds peace. It's the foundations built by people. And we talk about this disproportionate focus on Israel at the expense of other conflicts. And I'm proud that Lay of the Land has brought you the story of women in Afghanistan, women who the media has forgotten all about. Another element or another angle to the situation for women in Iran. I'm proud that we are bringing you the stories of NGOs working in African countries to end period poverty. I'm proud that we're talking about our soldiers who went into Syria at the heart of the civil war and brought civilians into Israel for medical treatment. And I'm delighted to bring you stories about how ordinary Israelis and ordinary Palestinians are working together every day beyond the headlines, because it's so important that people understand that this is a country beyond a conflict. Yes, we look at the pressing issues of our time. We focus a lot on anti-Semitism and Holocaust education as we lose more and more survivors. So it is up to us to tell their stories, make sure that their stories are heard. You asked me about the importance of stories. None are more important than victims of the Holocaust, survivors of the Holocaust, and survivors of genocide. Because if we don't learn from our history, we are doomed to repeat it. And the stories of everyday heroes, Paralympians, events in our history, we want to connect you to Israel, to the Jewish people, and to world events from a different perspective.
Okay, well, Rulene, I'd like to thank you very much, and I encourage everyone to please look at the website. I find it very interesting, the articles that you published there, and again, thank you very much for this conversation.
It is my pleasure anytime.